Welcome back again, Realty Pros. Tonight, we are going to pick back up on the topic that we've been on for the last few weeks, which has been listings. The last couple trainings, we went through our listing presentation in detail. Tonight, we're going to start with the listing documents themselves. Does anybody have any questions about the listing presentation that we went through? Or would anybody like to be brave enough to help me give a recap of what we went through last week? All right, I'll start. And when you're feeling brave, jump right in. So last week, we finished up with our listing presentation. We talked about everything from the time you meet with the sellers until the time when you've gotten them to settlement. So last week, we visited our timeline surrounding once you get those listing documents signed to getting that a copy of the key, having the yard sign installed, having those photos ordered, and everything from there forward. So today we're actually going to go ahead and dive right into the listing documents. So I will begin to share my screen. All right. So all of us should be familiar with dot loop. In dot loop, you would simply go to add loop and you would simply add the template to it, which is your listing loop. All right. So I've simply added the loop, gone to listing loop, and now I'm right here in the documents. Let me take a step back and go out of these documents here so that you can see what they look like. Okay. So this is the loop itself. I have a test because this is not an actual property address. However, this is for the sake of training. So in this loop, for those of you who have not gone into dot loop just yet, you will see listing docs. You see various folders. The ones that we're going through tonight are going to be included in your listing docs. Simply click on open there, or put a check in the box beside the listing documents and hit open. And that's going to open all the documents that we're going to go through tonight. All right. All right. So your listing documents, they begin with a warm greeting to your client. Everything that we do, we want to surround our client with, customer service. We want them to be insulated with customer service from the beginning of the process until the end of the process. Okay. So that needs to be from the first time they meet with you until they have a settlement gift, a housewarming, whatever it is that you can do to make sure that you give them wraparound service and make them feel like they've been very well served. So that letter there is just a personal little touch for them. All right. Then we want to make sure that we capture information so that we can custom fit their transaction to them. You see questions here. What can we do to make this transaction a perfect 10 for you? What matters most to you in an agent? What do you expect from the brokerage? Is there anyone else who would have a say in this process? What method of communication would you prefer? So all of these are simply background questions that will help you to give the best possible service to your client. All right, that's the first couple pages. Now, your actual intake form, your listing intake. This is crucial for you to fill in your listing documents. This is also going to be very important when you start to put these documents to use and you go ahead and add that information to Bright MLS. So you're going to want to get as much information on here as possible. If it does not apply, then it should be left blank, but anything that is applicable, you want to make sure that you get it. Of course, the seller's name, property address, numbers, the listing agent, you put your information here, the listing date, list price, the commission that you guys agree on, the split to the listing agent, buyer's agent, flat fee, all of this information here. Your mortgage balance. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these mortgages here because you want to make sure you ask the seller upfront what their mortgage balance is and what the number of liens are that they have on the home. And for those of us that may not be familiar with that term as it pertains to loans or mortgages, mortgages are liens on the home. Sellers, most of them will have one mortgage or one lien. Many have two mortgages, so a first and a second. Some will also have lines of credit. Some have various liens that will be attached to the property, so you want to inquire in advance. Can anybody give me a reason why you need to know upfront the number of liens that are on the property?
Will it help you to know what the equity is, or what the possible equity could be on the in the property?
Yes, it can definitely help in that area.
It'll help with your seller's net sheet.
Definitely help with your seller's net sheet too.
Because you definitely want to have all of that information for closing, because that can also be a reason that you can't close if it's not disclosed early enough. And then on top of that, so you can do the research to know if all of the loans or liens were paid.
Very good pointers, all of you. Those are great. So the last thing you want to do is get to settlement and find out this property has, you thought your seller had $80,000 worth of equity, but they have a home equity line of credit for $100,000 that was never disclosed. Now that's upside, the property is upside down, underwater, and now this goes from being a standard sale to a short sale. In addition to that, I'm going to piggyback on what each of you said because you've captured it all between the three of you. So thank you for that. When you're providing your seller with your seller net sheet, they're going to want to know what their bottom dollar is. What's the bottom line? And asking them this information in advance helps you to be as accurate as possible in what is only an estimate. But the title company, just for our knowledge, they're the ones that seek out the liens. So that is not that's not within our purview. We don't have to worry about having to go out to do the digging and all those different things to find out what the liens are that are attached to the property and if they're being paid. That's what the title company is going to be paid to do. So they will search those things out. But simply having that information in advance is going to stop you and the seller from having any heartache at settlement. All right. So get that information from your sellers up front. If you can get the information for the actual lenders, the title company will reach out. They're going to get this information specifically so that they can have a payoff done. But you want to make sure that you provide them with as much information in advance. All right. Another thing there is you want to ask if they purchased the home with a down payment assistance program. Does anybody want to take a guess as to why that's important?
Because some programs have stipulations and you need to be very clear of what they are, because that could prevent you from selling the house if it's too soon.
That's a really good guess. I'm going to elaborate there just a little bit. Oftentimes, when people purchase with a down payment assistance program, there can be certain portions that are loans that are forgivable after a certain time period, and then there are certain portions that are grants that are forgivable. If there's a loan and it requires that they live in the house for 3 years or 5 years or whatever that stipulation is, you need to know that in advance, because guess what? If they have not fulfilled that time period, that's now a lien against the property should they choose to sell. And we have definitely seen that come up before. So ask the seller that, because they may not think to tell you right offhand if you don't ask them. So ask if they did purchase with the down payment assistance program. Okay. Another question you want to know in advance is, are they current on their mortgage, or if they've received any notices from the bank? And this one might be a dead giveaway, but why do we need to know if they're current on their mortgages?
Because one, that could affect credit. And then two, that could also be an indication of any type of liens, or that they've lost their job. I mean, it's a number of reasons.
Those are some really good guesses. Good job with that. As it pertains to the sale of the property, it's going to be a little bit different than on the buying side. You want to know if they're current on their mortgage, because you want to know if you can actually move forward with a standard sale or if this property is about to foreclose. Because if they're reaching out to you to sell the property with urgency and they haven't missed any payments, great. If they take 60 days, not a problem. You can get it on the market, do what you need to do. But if they are behind on their mortgage and they're 2 or 3 months behind and they're reaching out with that urgency, chances are it could foreclose before you even get a chance to close the sale on that property. And that has happened before as well. So you want to make sure that you ask the seller in advance if they are current on their mortgage and if they've gotten any notices from the bank, because all of this is to make sure that you have a smooth listing process with them. All right. Now, moving on to some of the simpler information, you're going to gather all of this information from your seller. Although this information is available, some of it, let me say, not all of it, is available on the public records. You're going to ask the seller all of these questions very specifically, because what we see quite often is that the public records are either outdated or they're incomplete. Very rarely do I see public records that are complete and up to date. So you want to find out from your seller if they actually have 5 bedrooms instead of the, 4 or 0 that are listed. You want to ask them how many full bathrooms, how many half bathrooms, levels, fireplace, basement. You want to get all of this information, because what you're going to do after you gather this information is you're going to do a comparative market analysis for your seller. Of course, you're going to either, in this COVID space, have them to walk around the house with a video camera so you can actually lay eyes on the property. If you get a chance, go and visit the property, but you want to make sure that you get all of this to help you with your CMA for the property, okay? And each one of these are very important. So as you go through it, do your best not to skip through any of it. Ask them what the floor types are. Ask them whether or not they have garages, any additional structures. Can anybody tell me what additional structures are? Or give me some examples of additional structures?
Sunroom.
Sheds.
So a shed is definitely an additional structure. Sunroom would be is a part of the house. So it may be an add-on when they're building it, but something like a shed, anybody else want to take a guess at that?
Deck.
Definitely. What about a gazebo? What about a barn? What if they have a guest house? What if they have a pool house? Those structures that are separate from the home that also convey what they sell of the property. So you want to find that information out, okay? Then over here on the left, you're going to ask about bonus rooms as well, because you and I both know oftentimes people have a property and they have 6 rooms, they consider them 6 bedrooms, but maybe 2 of them are actually bonus rooms. Maybe one's actually a den and the other one is a room that has neither a closet or a window. So those are bonus rooms and they do add value to the property, even if they're not bedrooms. So find that information out, okay? Upgrades. You want to ask about every upgrade that the property has so that when you're doing your CMA, you make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. All right, same thing here. Your attached master bathroom, what are those features? You want to know if that's a shower tub combo or if it's a separate tub from a shower. Is it a soaking tub? Is it a jetted tub? Is it a 2-person tub? Is it a large shower? Is there a bench in the shower? You want to know all of this information so you know what your comparison is like. You want to know for the master bath, do they have a water closet in there? Are there skylights in the bathroom? Is there a double vanity in the bathroom? So get all of those features as it pertains to every aspect of the house. And if there's anything that's additional, you'll be able to type it there or in your notes space below. All right. We're almost finished with this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't go over this. You need to know in advance if the house has a condo association or an HOA. You need to get property management information in advance, the company, as well as a contact person and the contact number. You need to know what that condo association fee or the HOA fee is, what the frequency is, and then you also need to know if they are current on those. Again, this one may be a giveaway, but why do we need to know if they're current on their condo fees or their HOA fees?
Because they would have to pay that up to date once at the sale. I guess when they're selling the property, don't they have to bring those things current?
Yeah. In order for it to transfer from one person to the other, there can't be any outstanding liens. So that would be another lien against the property if they are not current on their HOA fees or on their condo fees. So get that information. Their notes right here, you can type into the notes section, anything that's not listed above, take detailed notes because you're going to need this information also as you're doing your remarks. Okay, so just pay attention, put as much detail in there as possible. All right, so now down to our actual board documents here. This very first one is required for each one of our listings as well as the sale, but for the sake of today, for our listings, it's important that the seller acknowledges, the seller understands that Porterhouse International Realty Group and the salesperson, so that can be Aurelia, that can be Rhonda, Angela, whomever that's on, the line here, they need to acknowledge that you guys represent the seller, and they would simply sign there. I want to point out this signature field at the bottom, however, because this is not for you guys to sign unless the client is unable or unwilling to sign above. Okay, this document is merely a disclosure. This one is not a contract. This is a disclosure. So this simply lets them know who you are and who you represent. And this will be transferred as a part of your disclosure so that the buyer who purchases the property knows who you are and who you represent. Okay, this consent for dual agency. This is very important as a part of your listing documents as well, because although as an agent, neither of you can represent two parties to the same transaction, the firm can. So Porterhouse as a whole can represent parties to every transaction because it's simply a matter of maybe Anthony representing one party and maybe Aurelia representing a different party. You're under the same brokerage firm, but neither of you are representing the buyer and the seller as one agent. So this document is extremely important because in order for Porterhouse agents to schedule tours for your listing, this document has to be signed. Okay, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. If somebody would look and see if they're off of mute, if you mute yourself for me really quickly. All right, does anybody have a question? All right, so this document, the signature is needed above this bolded black line just on your intake. So what does that mean? When you get your listing document signed, this consent for dual agency needs to be signed in this space here above the bolded black line. This is simply to give Porterhouse's agents permission to show the listing that you're taking. Without this document, then Porterhouse, as the other agents who are not representing the seller, they don't have the permission to bring buyers to that property. So it's very important that you get that signed. All right. As you go throughout the transaction, if one of your colleagues actually has a client who's interested and wants to make an offer, that's when you come back and revisit this space below the bolded black line. That's when you come down to affirmation of prior consent to dual agency, because now we're actually affirming that both parties are represented by the same firm and both parties want to transact and come into a purchase and sell agreement together. All right, so that's when you would effectuate the boxes below the line. If that's not the case, your clients do not need to sign below, they need to sign above the bolded black line. All right, and as it pertains to notification of dual agency within the team, any of our agents who are on the team, you will need this for each one of your transactions, for each one of your purchases, as well as your listings, you simply include that there. All right. Margaret, did you have a question?
No.
All right. If you guys have a question, go ahead, feel free, unmute yourself. I don't want to skip over anybody. All right, so now let's come on down to the exclusive rights to sell. This, as we all know, this is a contract. This is your contract between your client, yourself, and Porterhouse. This is what secures your commission payment. So each item that is applicable on here needs to be filled in. So that being said, the first thing you're going to fill in is the date. So I see listing agreements oftentimes where people skip over the date. It is a very important part of the contract. You have to add everything, the date, the seller's names. If you have a mailing address, as much information about them as possible, so we know who the contract applies to. Make sure their cell phone numbers are there, their email address is there, the brokerage is there, the brokerage address, because you're creating a legally binding contract between two parties. So you want to make sure that this information is complete and full. Okay. Now the property listing, that's where the property address is going to go. All right. Paragraph 3, where it has property listing, whether or not it's being sold in fee simple or subject to ground rent. It's either or, subject to ground rent or fee simple. So you choose whichever one is applicable. Your listing term, you want to put that information here. I recommend getting a listing term of 12 months. So unless your client, says, hey, I would rather do a shorter listing term, you should definitely do your best to get a 12-month listing term. Now, I will say that there are going to be instances where your client is ready to list, and then there may be circumstances that arise, and now that's been put on hold. Your activation of the listing, the activation has been put on hold for 2 months or 3 months, or something has changed. They need to temp it off the market. They need to bring it back on the market. And if you simply do a short-term listing, now you're out of listing with them by the time they're actually ready to go active. So I would say give yourself 12 months on there unless your client wants to negotiate otherwise. Okay? Terms for the brokers, your termination. You want to make sure you put in there mutual agreement in writing signed by both parties. You want to be sure that you have that there so that you guys, you don't get any surprises as it pertains to termination. It has to come through you, and you have a chance to talk with your client to make sure you satisfy any of their concerns. Listing price, you have to put your listing price in your listing agreement. That should go without saying, but you want to make sure that you do that. So you guys are going through your comparative market analysis and you're setting a price before you fill this in. Make sure that all of your listing agreements include the price, right? Showing instructions. I'm going to take a moment and talk about this just a little bit longer, because with your showing instructions, there's some important things that you want to put there. You want to make sure that if the property is going to have a yard sign, if it's going to be on lockbox, if the showing instructions are going to be Monday through Friday from 10 until 6 p.m., Saturday, Sunday, 11 to 2, whatever those hours are, you want to make sure that you put all of that information right here in your showing instructions. You also want to make sure that you put in here, in the event that your seller says, okay, well, we're going to go ahead and move forward with listing today, but I don't want the property to become active until April the 1st. You need to put that right there. Make sure that all of those instructions are clearly listed in the showing instructions for your listing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about anything thus far? All right, we're going to move on down to paragraph 7. In paragraph 7, the easiest thing to remember here is that nothing should be initialed whatsoever in paragraph 7 by your client. So paragraph 7A, paragraph 7B, paragraph 7C, those should be blank from your client, okay? Because what paragraph 7 says is, paragraph 7 is saying that the broker may not submit the property to the MLS, and then the client acknowledges, if they're not entering the property into MLS, then of course they're not going to have as much exposure, so it could affect the price of the property and what it sells for. It also says that the broker may not submit and market the property through display on the internet. Broker may submit the property through display on the internet, but the seller doesn't want their property address listed. So there's so many stipulations that have an adverse effect on the sale of your listing, and it has an adverse effect on the overall price that the listing is going to sell for, because paragraphs 7A, B, and C all give limitations to your ability to market the property, which is going to directly impact the price that it's going to sell for. So when you go through your listing agreement, you want to make sure that everything there is, when you click on it, it is assigned. You assign it to no one so that your seller cannot sign off on those. Now you have the conversation with your seller and you let your seller know why you're skipping over those. Okay, so you don't just skip over it. You let them know exactly why you're going to skip over those, and just ensure that the initial spaces are not there. Okay, now as you get down to D, paragraph 7D, I prefer for us to do the second option where it says seller authorizes or does not authorize the display of unedited comments or reviews of the property, or display of hyperlink to such comments on the MLS participants' websites. So 7D, they're talking about MLS participants' websites, which neither you nor I have any control over. So because these are third-party websites where we cannot control what they put, what they say, what value they give to the property, what comments they put about the property, we want to make sure that we have our client to say that they do not authorize it. Okay. Now, that being said, just because our clients don't authorize it doesn't mean that those commercial websites aren't going to put information on there about your client's home, because it will be syndicated there, but it's just the unauthorized or unedited comments and unauthorized automated value for the property that we want to have the clients to not authorize. Okay. Everything that we put on Bright MLS is based on the conversation that we've had with our client. Is based on everything that's in our listing documents. And we're responsible and accountable to Bright as well as the board for anything that we put there. We can't say the same thing for those participants' websites. So because there's nothing that we can do for, I don't want to spend too much time there, but I want to give you kind of a brief overview as to why we have our clients to choose does not authorize on that space. All right, moving on, 7E. 7E, coming soon. As much as possible, you want to make sure that your client initials off on 7E, coming soon. This gives you the ability to actually list the property as coming soon. It gives them up to 21 days to get the property ready to become active on the market. Okay, without 7E being signed, you cannot list it as coming soon. So make sure that you have your clients to sign there. Paragraph 8. So either the client authorizes or does not authorize the broker to discuss other properties at the client's open house. We prefer does not authorize, because when you're there at the open house, you want to do everything that you can to sell the property that you're there hosting the open house for. Now, should the property not meet the needs of the buyer who is there at the open house and they're talking to you, once the open house has ended and you're having a conversation with them after the open house, and you are free to share information about any property that actually meets their needs, once they have confirmed that the property that you're hosting an open house for does not meet their needs. And I'll say that again, after the open house. After is the only time you can start talking about another property. All right. Paragraph 10, home security systems that record audio. You want to make sure that your clients sign off on that, because they're going to have showings. They're going to have people to come through their house. Oftentimes people have a home security system that does record, and they have audio visual on there. You want to make sure that they turn the audio off while people are touring their properties, because people have not consented to the audio. All right. Now, fair housing, you want to make sure you have this conversation. And I've actually only had maybe a few instances where a seller will directly say something that, goes against fair housing. And when that happens, you're duly bound by your license to let them know, as it pertains to the offers that we accept, the contract that you accept, it has to be based on the merit of the offer alone and cannot be with respect to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, handicap, or familial status. You want to make sure that they know that. Okay. So, and in DC, source of income is a protected status as well. So we like to make it a practice at Porterhouse to make sure that we do not even, in Maryland, although the state hasn't caught up with it just yet, you want to make sure you let your clients know that source of income is also a protected status or a protected class. All right. And I want to pause there for a minute, because there are some conversations that can seem to be kind of harmless, but they're conversations that your sellers will have with you. Has anybody had an experience with a seller that has said something that makes you raise a question about whether or not it fits into that category? And I'll give you guys an example. I've had sellers to say, well, I want to make sure that, a lovely family, with some little kids get the house, because I really enjoyed raising my family in the house. So I really want to make sure that a lovely couple that has a few little kids gets the house. Have you guys ever heard anybody say that?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the point of this conversation. When they say that, you want to make sure that you remind them, hey, we cannot choose the offer based on familial status. So whether a person, is a lovely couple, they have a spouse and they have children, because what about a person who's single who doesn't have children? We want to make sure that we don't give any unfair advantage or disadvantage to people based on any of these fair housing classes, okay, as it pertains to any of these things. So, and that's an advantage or disadvantage, because oftentimes we'll think about, well, they didn't say it in a disparaging way, so it's not a disadvantage. Well, on the contrary, you got to make sure that it's not an unfair advantage as well, okay? So that being said, they have to look at the offer and choose based on the merit of the offer and not based on any of those things. We got to make sure that we advise our seller of those things, okay? They want to make sure that they maintain insurance on the property. Should anything happen, you want to ensure that that listing is covered. And now, there's no crisis because they stopped paying the mortgage and they no longer have insurance on it. Okay. Paragraph 13, from the time that they list with you, repairs to the property must be done by a licensed professional. All right. 14, the broker's compensation. This is where your compensation is going to be listed. This is where your 6% plus your flat fee is going to be listed on each one of your listing agreements. All right. 14A3 down here at the bottom. This is your broker protection period. You want to put, I would say, at least 180 days in there in the event that something were to happen that delayed settlement, and the date of settlement happens after your listing expires. You want to make sure that you get compensated for your hard work. So when you sell that property for the seller, you want to make sure that nothing happens and, oh, well, you were out of, your listing agreement 2 weeks ago, so now you're not due a commission. No, that's what this broker protection period is for here. So make sure you put a substantial amount of time in the event that your efforts lead to a sale, you'll still get paid. All right, so let's come on down here to paragraph C. So that's 14C. This is as it pertains to forfeiture of deposit. And this is a very important piece, because as buyers submit offers on your listings, they're going to be doing so with an earnest money deposit. Now, that earnest money deposit, we talk to buyers oftentimes about making sure that they're serious so that their earnest money deposit is not in jeopardy. But when an earnest money deposit is in jeopardy, this is what determines where it goes and how much of it. Okay, so in this paragraph, I recommend putting 50%, so 50-50 there, so that for your efforts as an agent, you are compensated as well. So if by chance it's a failed sale because the buyer simply defaulted for no reason in the contract or no reason that, allowed for a contingency and now they can get out of it, but they simply defaulted just because, and they walked away from the earnest money deposit. This is where the breakdown happens. And in your listing agreement, you're letting your seller know in advance, hey, in the event that the earnest money deposit is forfeited, 50% of that earnest money deposit goes to you for, your inconvenience, and 50% of it goes to the brokerage. Okay, so paragraph 15, authority to cooperate with other brokers. This is the paragraph that allows us to pay another brokerage outside of Porterhouse as the selling brokerage for a transaction. So whichever brokerage brings in the buyer, this is where you stipulate what percentage you're going to pay them out of the 6% commission that you've negotiated with the seller. So whether that's 2.5%, whether that's 3%, whatever that commission is, it's going to go right here. And then you're going to put what you and the seller agreed to here. That's what you're going to put in bright MLS. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through every single paragraph because some of these are legalese that we're going to get Glenn back on the line to go through in detail with you guys. I just want to make sure you know how to fill this listing document in for your clients and which options to elect and why. Okay. Paragraph 19, lead-based paint. You absolutely need to choose which of these years is applicable for the listing that you're taking. You want to make sure that if it's built prior to 1978, you have your client sign there during or after 1978, or if the seller is uncertain and you can't find it on the tax record, then you're going to have them to initial there. But that's very important because that's what determines whether or not the other lead disclosures and documents are going to become applicable to this contract. Okay, so then also 19B where it's talking about renovation and repair of a property, the seller needs to sign there in the event that the property was built before 1978. If there's been any type of renovation or repairs to the painting, the person doing so had to have been EPA certified to deal with that lead-based paint. So this is simply an acknowledgement. The seller needs to initial there.
Excuse me, Jasmine.
Sure.
In that section, if a person in A said that they're unsure, do they still need to initial B?
Yes. So
Okay.
everything in, yes, I'm glad you asked that. They definitely need to initial because it's not saying that it happened or didn't happen. It's simply saying that they've read paragraph B.
Okay, thank you.
You got it. All right, so notice regarding disclosure of deferred water and sewer assessments. I'm going to have Glenn to spend some time on this for us because I've gotten quite a number of questions from clients surrounding this area because we have some areas that are served by the public wastewater facilities, and some of those areas have deferred sewer charges and deferred water charges. So we're going to have him to do a more thorough training on this for you guys. So I don't know that I would do it too much justice with the time that we have tonight. So I'm going to simply say you're going to ask your client whether or not their property is serviced by one of the public wastewater facilities. And if so, you simply choose is or is not based on what the client tells you. But we'll have another training on that so you guys have some background to it. All right. 21A, this is a very important paragraph, and these are questions that you guys, even on the line, have even had, and we've had these discussions. This is what dictates whether or not you have the authority to disclose existing offers on the listing. Many of you who've had listings, you got calls and you will get calls from agents who say, hey, do you have an offer on the listing already? How do you know whether or not it's okay for you to tell them whether or not you have offers? Well, it's simple. Based on paragraph 21A in your listing agreement, which option did your seller choose? Did your seller authorize you to disclose existing offers, or did they not authorize you to disclose existing offers? Does anybody have any questions about this? I want to make sure that we have a little bit of dialogue here so that that makes sense.
Is there a recommendation as to which one we would want the client to select over one over the other?
Yes, there is, and thank you for asking that. The first thing that I'll say is it's probably 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, but my personal preference is to authorize us to disclose existing offers. And the reason why is that it creates competition. So when a buyer's agent knows, hey, there is another offer on the property, their recommendation to their client is going to be, hey, there's competition, submit your highest and best offer. Don't go in lowballing. Whereas if they don't know that there's an offer on the property, you know, they could say, well, let's see if the seller is going to accept 10,000 below asking price and pay you 3% in closing costs. So it creates competition, definitely. So that being said, there are also some buyers who will say, you know, there's an offer on the property. I don't really want to get into a bidding war. So because there's an offer on the property, I'll just move on to the next one. So to that end, there will be a buyer or two who will forego submitting an offer on the property because they know that there are already other offers on the property. So that's why there are two different options, and you let the seller choose what their preference is. I prefer authorizing to disclose existing offers because most of the time that means you're going to get competition. It means you're going to get those multiple offers that are your more aggressive offers.
Is it okay for you to suggest the reason why you prefer?
Definitely. They're going to ask,
Okay.
and you need to be able to talk both of those through. And most sellers will ask you that question. So make sure that you're comfortable with, explaining just that. Well, in one hand, agents will ask and we'll let them know that there is an offer. Now, something very important that I want to share here is you cannot disclose any of the terms of the offer whatsoever. So you can't give a hint as to what the purchase price is, what they're asking for in terms of closing costs, settlement date, what contingencies. You cannot give another buyer's agent, you can't give them any hint as to what those offers entail whatsoever. You can only disclose the existence of the offer, none of the details. Now, I will say that again, because when you are listing a property, your colleagues know that you're not supposed to do this, but I promise you 100% they will call you and they will say, well, hey, Rhonda, I see that you have, this property on the market. Do you have any offers in hand? And you'll say, yeah, Joe, I do have, an offer in hand. They'll say, okay, well, what does your client want? Tell me a little bit about what your client needs. What do I need to submit, in an offer so that we can get ratified tomorrow? They will. They're going to ask you. You're going to have those conversations. And can anybody take a guess as to what your response needs to be so as not to reveal any unfair information from the other offer and give them an advantage?
Ms. Porter, I would just say to come in with your best offer, your strongest offer, and let's see how it goes without giving any specifics whatsoever.
That's a great guess, Herman. That's exactly it. You let them know, hey, Joe, I appreciate your enthusiasm and I'm going to submit that offer to the seller as soon as I get it in my hands, but I can't give you any of the details. Submit your buyer's highest and best and we'll get it right over to the seller. Okay, so just remember that. All right, so next, home warranty. Home warranty number 22.
Hey, Jazz, real quick. I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
If you're in a if you have two offers and they're escalating,
Mhm.
would you then be able to disclose, because you need to show like if you had one that's a cash buyer, one that's a conventional buyer, would you, and there's an escalation clause in there, so now you have two kind of matching offers. At that point, then you would kind of need to let them know, like, all right, look, well, I have one that's cash, but one conventional, but you guys are both at, $300,000 or whatever the.
Gotcha. So that is an excellent question. And I'm so glad you asked, because that has a slight variance in the answer, in that if you have somebody, if the seller is willing to consider an escalation clause, the terms in the escalation clause say in order for your seller to escalate the offer that they must provide written evidence of another offer that's higher than theirs, that's now going to cause theirs to escalate. So then it would require that you submit, the first page, or in your case, Curtis, when you're talking about two different escalation clauses, it's going to require that you submit that. Now, here's what I will say to that. Oftentimes, the buyer will not ask to see the other offer. If they do not ask, do not volunteer the information. If they do ask, simply know that it's in the documents and they do have a right to receive evidence of it. That being said, you are not submitting the entire offer to them in any way, shape, form, or fashion. You are only showing them the purchase price. So you don't need to show them the type of financing. You don't need to show them the settlement date. You don't need to show them any of those things. You only need to show them something sufficient so that they can justify why their offer is being escalated above the initial purchase price that they offered.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
You got it. So 21B, presentation of offers. It is our responsibility to submit all offers to the seller within a timely manner. So talk to your seller beforehand and inquire as to whether or not the seller wants you to submit the offers as they're received, or if your seller wants to have an offer, deadline. So that deadline can be 4 days after you go live in this market. That's sufficient for you to have offers in hand. So if the seller wants you to hold on to those offers until the offer deadline, and then you submit a ball on that day, that's a conversation that you need to have in hand. But nevertheless, it's our responsibility to make sure that the seller sees every single offer that comes in on that property. Even if you're under contract, even if, you know, whatever the case is, every offer that comes in, we must submit that to the seller, okay? That being said, moving on to paragraph number 22, home warranties. So you guys know we're partnered with HWA. So paragraph 22 simply outlines that. It says that the broker does or does not offer the opportunity for a seller to purchase a home warranty. So it would be does. Your brokerage does offer that opportunity. And directly below that, the seller will get to choose whether or not they desire a warranty or whether or not they decline a warranty. Okay, I'll spend a quick moment there because it is a tremendous benefit to our sellers. Through our partnership with Home Warranty of America, our sellers get free sellers coverage. What does that mean? Has anybody had any experience with the free sellers coverage?
I have. It's basically they have up to a year for certain items in their home that can be fixed. Whether it's them doing it prior to selling the home or even after the home is sold, the buyers or the purchasers can use it.
Thank you for sharing that, Rhonda. I'm gonna kind of break that down a little bit more. So HWA offers our clients, our sellers, a free home warranty. They do not pay for the home warranty up front. Should they choose or need to use the home warranty to address anything that could arise during your listing period or from a home inspection that they need to do repairs for, then they're able to use the warranty as if they've paid for it without paying for the actual warranty. They would only pay a trade call fee. And what we've seen for our sellers, the trade call fee has been $60. So for once the buyer purchases the home, their trade call fee is about $75 or $100. But for sellers, depending on the level of warranty that you choose, if you choose the platinum or if you choose the basic, that'll determine whether or not it's $75 or $100. But for sellers in this free sellers coverage period, they're only paying $60 if they need to use it to get something repaired. Okay, so if they're using it for an HVAC system and that's something that would have cost them $2,000 to replace, they're only paying $60 to have it repaired. Can anybody see the benefit in that for your seller clients?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So have that conversation with them in advance and let them know that, hey, there is absolutely no requirement that they even keep it. Okay. Now the goal, however, is to make sure that if the buyer is purchasing the home, have the buyer to pay for the home warranty. The seller is not a guaranteed commitment that they actually have to purchase it at settlement. It's no obligation. They get to use it through Porterhouse. Should they choose to pass it on to the buyer, then they can pass it on to the buyer and they could either pay for it at settlement in order to do so, or the buyer can pay for it at settlement in order to do so, but there's no obligation. Even if they didn't decide to keep it and pass it on to the buyer, they still get to use it for repairs just because they're listed with you here at Porterhouse. Okay, any questions about that?
Yes, Ms. Porter?
Yes.
Yeah, quick question. So as far as transferable, okay, let's say you already either had a warranty or you wanted to get the warranty. Let's say you've already gotten the warranty. How does it transfer? Is it something that's transferable that we can offer to the buyer, or do they just have to kind of get it their own because it's on their own?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking that. So the seller's coverage is not transferable. However, the seller's coverage is not paid for until the seller decides at settlement that they want to keep it and transfer it to the buyer. So in short, you would simply go on to HWA. I'll have Mr. Porter or even Cynthia Voigt, who's our HWA rep, to give you that information. We'll have her to come in and do another training too, so you guys know how to set those warranties up. But you simply go on there and you set up a warranty to be paid for your client at settlement. You generate an invoice. That invoice goes over to the title company. Whoever decides to pay for it, whether it's the buyer or the seller, it's going to be included in the contract. That's in your addendum of clauses page, whereby they choose, whether the property is going to be sold with a home warranty, and then they make the election as to who's going to pay for it. So whichever of them pays for it, you simply put the home warranty information in there. You generate that home warranty by either going onto HWA, you create the account, or you simply send the property details to Cynthia Void and she will do it for you. But either way, it's paid for at settlement for the buyer should the seller decide to transfer it to the buyer, then the seller can pay for it. If the buyer decides to purchase it on their own, then the buyer can pay for it. But either way, it's paid for at settlement. Did that answer
Okay.
your question, Kermon?
Absolutely, got it.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah.
All right, paragraph number 23, whether or not your seller is exempt from providing a disclosure or is not exempt from providing a disclosure. So there are a number of reasons in here that a seller can be exempt from providing a disclosure, okay? We're gonna have Glenn to talk about various reasons there. One of the most important things that I wanna point out is in Maryland, the seller does not have to provide a disclosure should they choose not to. They can do a disclaimer. In other states, like DC, they must do a property disclosure. In Maryland, even if they're not exempt, they can still choose to do a disclaimer. We'll go through the disclosure and disclaimer in detail when we get to those documents. All right. So in the event that there are any violations or anything on the property or court orders or anything affecting the title to the property, then the seller is supposed to make sure that those things are taken care of before the transfer of title happens. All right, paragraph 25, you're going to ask your seller, hey, Mr. and Mrs., seller, do you guys have any of these easements or encumbrances on the property? And that is, there are a list of them: Maryland Environmental Trust, Historic Trust, so forth and so on. You can read down and ask them if they have any of those easements on the property. Many of the times they don't. If they do not have any of those, then you simply initial right here. So you see 25B, number 1, if they do not have any of those easements on the property. If they have one or several of them, then you initial paragraph 25B, number 2. And you simply check the ones that are applicable. And any easements that they do have, you're simply going to put a check in the box below to say either the seller has or has not provided reports that pertain to the easements above. Okay. Maryland non-resident sellers. If they are non-residents of the state of Maryland, then when they sell their property, they will be subject to taxes that the title company will withhold. If they're Maryland residents, then we already know that they're not paying taxes up to $250,000 worth of equity if they're single, or up to $500,000 worth of equity if they are married. All right, paragraph number 29, extremely important. Glenn did maybe 2 trainings for us on this with regards to Foreign Investment and Real Estate Property Tax Act. If the seller is not a United States citizen and that seller of the property owes taxes, then the property could be at jeopardy for the buyer. So you must ask your seller when you're listing if they are a US citizen and if they have any unpaid property taxes, because this paragraph gets very dangerous for the buyer of the property in the event that something like that were to happen. So I will have, again, Glenn to come back and go through all of the legalese for this so that you can understand what the conversation needs to entail. But for the sake of tonight, we're simply going through the information that you need to fill in. Okay. Paragraph 32, addenda. Whichever addenda you're going to attach, and in this template, you have quite a number of these already here for you. So simply put a check in the box next to the ones that are applicable. Okay. Make sure your seller signs it. Make sure you sign it. So where it says broker or authorized representative, that's you. Make sure you sign off on all of your listing documents. Does anybody have any questions before we go on to this next addendum? All right. Inclusions and exclusions. This is very important. When a buyer's buying the property, they want to know, is it going to come with the I'm sorry, not the utilities, but the appliances. They want to know, hey, is it going to come with that amazing chandelier? Is it going to come with all the appliances? Am I actually going to get everything that I'm looking at in the property today? So this is where your seller is going to decide beforehand which items will convey with the property. And they're going to check the boxes of the things that will convey, and anything that does not convey should not be checked. If by chance there are items that are not included above that they would like to include in the sale of the property, they simply need to add it there. If there are items that are not included above that they want to make sure that they exclude from the sale of the property, it needs to be typed in there. Okay, leased items. If by chance your seller has solar panels or anything else that's leased as it pertains to the property that the buyer is now going to have to take over payment for, then you might want to be sure that you put that on here so that there are no surprises to the buyer. Okay, I want to make one other statement where I don't see in any of our board documents the ability for that alarm system. So it'll convey, but I want, if you have a property that the alarm system, the seller's still under contract, there's another year, 2 years on the contract. So now the new buyer is going to have to take over the bill. We need to make sure that that's included in this document. So write it down, put it all here so that the buyer knows, and there are no surprises to the buyer when it comes time to settle. Okay, utilities, you're going to find out from your seller what these utilities are, and you're going to put that there, and your seller will sign off on that document. All right, I'm going to pause for questions before we go to the disclosure disclaimer. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay,
As far as alarm systems and security cameras, what if the seller wants to keep, let's say, the display that they purchased for their cameras, or the whatever monitor shows it, but they're leaving all the cameras? Do I need to put any of that on inclusion exclusion since it's not necessarily attached to anything?
so say that one more time. You said the display versus the cameras.
Yeah, the cameras will stay, but the display that shows where you can view what the camera's showing, they want to keep that because they bought some high-end device to show. They want to keep that device, but they're leaving all the cameras. Is there anything that we need to include on the inclusion exclusion since that's just a monitor?
I would put it there because it goes with the cameras. If it didn't go with the cameras, if it was just a TV or a computer, then it wouldn't be considered. But because it goes directly with the cameras, excluded on here
Okay, thank you.
so that there's no question whatsoever.
Okay, Ms. Porter, I have a quick question. One is, so when the person has let's say they put the solar panels on or they did something like that, is that considered a mechanic's lien, and does that have to be discussed, or is that it just goes through with the sale? How does that work?
So good question. It is not a mechanic's lien in the sense that somebody's done work on the property that they haven't been paid for. So now they're putting a lien against the property. It is a leased item that it conveys with the property. So for
Right.
solar panels, when the homeowner purchases solar panels, most of the time they're leasing them and they do not own them. And because they don't own them, they have I'm not sure how long their contract can be on the solar panels, but it can be very extensive until they're paid off. So to that end, the new buyer purchasing the property has to come in and assume whatever those payments are for the solar panels. So it's extremely important to let them know, because if they're paying, whatever the cost is for the solar panel, now they've got to factor that into whatever their costs are going to be for their mortgage and their utilities and so forth and so on.
Exactly.
And we
Right.
can't do so with a surprise. You've got to make sure that they're aware of that in advance, and it has to be in the contract.
Do they have a choice in that on whether they can pay that, or just say, I don't want that, or do they just have to deal with it?
So if they buy the house that has solar panels, the solar panels come with the
Panels
house.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay. Makes sense, of course. All right. Thank you.
You got it. All right, next, the property disclosure disclaimer statement. So this document is a 4-page document, the property disclosure. Page 1 right here, pages 2 and 3, this is where the seller will be asked questions about every aspect of the house, from the foundation, as you can see, to the basement with leaks, other structures, plumbing, heating, air conditioning, water treatment, fire sprinklers, wood destroying insects, so forth and so on. So this is a very detailed description of the condition of the property. The seller can choose to either complete this disclosure or the very next document, which is the disclaimer. You and I cannot tell them which of these documents to choose. You have to let them know what their options are, and the choice has to be absolutely theirs. However, what you do need to advise the seller of is that this disclosure is the only document that survives settlement. What does that mean? That means that once your buyer and seller go to settlement, the document is dead, it's executed, it's done. There's nothing left to be fulfilled in that document. So it's dead. This, on the other hand, the buyer has the right to come back to the seller after settlement up to 3 years after they find an issue or should have found an issue that the seller put on the disclosure there's no issue with. And let's just use a real example. We had a property that sold, and the seller put there's no roof, there's no roof leak or no leak in the roof. And within 2 weeks of living in the property, there were absolutely leaks in the roof. So the buyer had legal recourse against the seller because the items that were in here were not articulated appropriately. They did not disclose everything that they were supposed to disclose. Okay, so as it pertains to the disclosure, the seller is still legally bound to what they put on this document even after settlement. All right, that being said, page 4 is the disclaimer, which is the seller's choice. It's their right in Maryland. They can disclaim even if they're not exempt from them. The disclaimer says that the seller elects to sell the property without representation, warranties to the condition, except otherwise provided in the contract. It's being sold with any latent defects and all of those things. It says, except for the latent defects listed below, the seller makes no representation or warranties as to the condition of the property. It's sold as is, and including any of those latent defects. So with the disclaimer, what the seller does is they simply choose whether or not they have knowledge of any latent defects. Either yes, they do, and simply list them below, or no, they do not. Okay. Once they list what those latent defects are here, they have done their duty. Their duty is to disclose. And for you and I, we have a duty. The rule is once you know, you must disclose. So if there is a latent defect that's going on with the property, your seller must disclose it. The difference is with this disclaimer document, the seller no longer has any legal obligation to the document or the property or any of the defects that they've listed here. They're no longer legally bound to this document because they have disclosed it. It's on the disclaimer, and the buyer agreed to purchase the property with the disclaimer statement, meaning that the seller did not give any, warranties or covenants or anything that pertains to the condition of the property. The buyer agreed to sell it or purchase it as is with any defects and so forth and so on. Okay. So when you explain these documents to your seller, you let them know it's their choice. You explain the difference between the two, and whatever they choose is what they sign. That being said, it's extremely important for you guys when the seller is doing their disclaimer document. That's something that you want to make sure they do on their own. You do not help them in any way with the disclosure or the disclaimer. You do not, coach them through, like if they're asking, hey, I'm filling out 1A and, what do you think about this? You are not involved whatsoever in the disclaimer process, because once now, if there's something that and the seller has decided not to disclose, now you become liable. Now Porterhouse becomes liable for not disclosing. So make sure that the seller knows what their options are. It's their choice. You give it to them and leave it there. Okay, is everybody still on?
Yes.
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 All right, perfect. All right, I think somebody may have gotten kicked off. If you got kicked off, come on back and I'll let you in. All right, so that's the disclosure disclaimer. All right, now your as is addendum. If your seller is selling the property as is, they have two options, either as is without inspection or as is with inspection and the right to terminate. Okay, now without inspection means that they're not allowing the buyer to have any contingencies regarding the property's condition. Okay, if they're selling as is with inspection and the right to terminate, then the provisions for the inspection and all of those things are included in this document. If you use this as is addendum in any form, you do not need to also include a property. Well, when you receive an offer on your listing, you do not need to accept an offer that has an inspection contingency. It's one or the other. Either the buyer is buying as is, or they're including an inspection contingency. Okay, does that make sense to everybody?
Say that one more time, please.
So either the buyer is purchasing the property as is, or they're including an inspection contingency. If they're purchasing the property as is and you're the listing agent, then when you're reviewing those offers for your seller to accept, you want to make sure that your seller does not execute or sign off on the inspection contingency document. Okay, because the inspection contingency, the language directly conflicts from what your as is addendum states. So it's one or the other, not both. Any questions about that? All right, so then if your seller is selling the property as is with inspection and the right to terminate, you're going to make sure you put the number of days that the seller is giving the buyer to come back and let them know whether or not they want to move forward with the property. Put it here, and I recommend no more than 7 days. 5 to 7 days is perfect. You don't want to give the buyer 10 days, 14 days, 20 days, or anything crazy like that, because the longer your contingency period, the longer a period of time that your contract is not a formally like a firm legally binding contract. Because anytime there's an outstanding contingency, the buyer has a way out of the contract. So make sure that that contingency period is as short as possible, reasonable enough to give the buyer a chance to get the inspection done, but not so long that it will now, cause your seller to miss out on other offers that could have been ratified. All right, addendum of clauses. So transfer and recordation taxes, split 50-50. That's language that's customary in the contract. So whether your buyer or seller choose it or not, it's already customary in Maryland. It is best if you specify the 50-50 split, however. Paragraph 2, coinciding settlement. In the event that, the buyer's purchasing a property and selling a property at the same time, you would choose that. In the event that the seller is purchasing another home as well as selling this home, this is the document that you would choose. Okay, this is the paragraph in this as is addendum, paragraph number 3. You would make sure that your seller initials paragraph number 3, and you put the number of days that your seller needs for that contingency. I recommend 30 to 45 days for your seller to find another home. This is a disclosure that has to be made to the buyer before they get under a ratified contract with your seller. They need to know, hey, the seller's actually looking for another home there. Okay, and this is what's going to help you to make sure that that transition is seamless for them. Does anybody have any questions about that? All right. Common driveways are not as common, but should you list a property that has one, you want to make sure that you elect paragraph 4, make sure that your seller signs off on it. Same thing with 5 and 6. If your seller is doing a 1031 tax deferred exchange, then you want to make sure you choose paragraph number 5. If the buyer is doing a 1031 deferred tax exchange, you want to make sure that you initial paragraph number 6. Now, we were talking about the home warranties, and this is the document that you would use to choose which the buyer or the seller are paying for the home warranty. And if the seller's providing it, you want to put the cost not to exceed whatever that number is. If the buyer is providing it, the buyer's going to put the cost not to exceed in the company that they're using. But it's a good practice if you are the listing agent on the property, if you simply put in here home warranty that the buyer is going to pay for it, and you add that to your disclosure, that helps the seller. Because I strongly recommend that when the seller is selling the property as is, they have a warranty with this contract. Now, that warranty can be paid for by the buyer, but you want to make sure that that buyer has somebody to call should anything happen with the property. Okay? Any questions about that? All right. So notice to buyer and seller of buyer's rights and seller's obligations. So you want to make sure that your seller signs off on it. This document simply says that the buyer has the right to know and the seller has an obligation to disclose anything that is a major issue that would cause the buyer to not want to purchase the property, such as water and sewer system issues, if there's something structurally wrong, plumbing, electrical, heating, infestation, if there are any land matter issues, hazards, radon, or anything with regards to, smoke alarms and anything that will be an issue to the buyer. It's the buyer's right to know, and the seller has an obligation to disclose. So that's effectively what this document is saying. It also says that the buyer has the right to receive the disclosure disclaimer statement in order for their contract to be ratified. If the buyer submits an offer without receiving a copy of the disclosure disclaimer, then they can rescind their offer. They can rescind that offer, and your seller's contract is not a firm contract. So all of that language is outlined in this addendum. So this, you just make sure that your seller signs off on it. And this is one of the documents that you as an agent have to sign off on as well. Okay. This next one, this is only for PG County. So this DNA, which is the Prince George's County Disclosure and Notice Addendum, this again is only for Prince George's County. So it's not going to be for your Howard County, Anne Arundel County, so forth and so on documents. Not sure why that screen got so large there. I'll continue to move on down. So in the event that there's a tree conservation plan, you make sure that you choose yes. If not, click on no. The record title holder, is the seller the record title holder? If so, you put yes. If not, you put no. Can anybody give me some examples as to when a seller may not be the person on title for the property?
Co-op?
Foreclosures.
Any other reasons?
Estate sale.
Definitely. Anybody else? So yes, and definitely to those two. There are a number of reasons. If it is a probate, if it's estate, just like Curtis said, if it's not short sales foreclosure, if by chance an investor purchased the property, but the courts have not yet recorded him on title, but now the property is his because he has the settlement statement and he purchased it. There are a number of occasions in which the record title holder may not be the person selling. And if that is the case, you need that disclosure in advance. So you simply you ask the seller and you choose yes or no as applicable. Now, if by chance the seller of the property is not the person on title, then now you need further documentation. You're going to need document that shows that this person, although they're not on title, they have the legal right to convey this property, they have the legal right to sell. So if by chance it's an estate sale, you need to make sure that they are the executor of the estate. They're the personal representative. Whatever those documents are that show that they have legal right to sell this property, you're going to need that there. Okay. If the property is located within a special taxing district, you choose yes or no. If the property is located within 1 mile of an airport, you choose yes or no. Okay, this document is required to be signed by the buyer and the seller. And funny enough, Prince George's County considers this to be a misdemeanor if the buyer and the seller fail to provide this, if the seller fails to provide this information. So the buyer and the seller have to sign off on this document for Prince George's County. All right, paragraph 2, historic site or district. If the property is in a historic district, then you want to make sure that you choose yes. If it's not, then you choose no, but make sure that something is selected there. If there are any unimproved roads leading up to the house, then you choose yes. If not, you simply choose no. Okay, if there are any uncompleted community amenities, say by chance the builder, when they were starting to build the community, they said, okay, well, we're going to give you a pool and we're going to give you a dog park, but they haven't completed those amenities. If that is the case, then you select yes. If not, then you select no. All right, see how far we can get there. I'm gonna go back to this because this is extremely important. So carbon monoxide detectors. All of your sellers, it is required that there's a carbon monoxide detector on each level of the house. Okay, as we go down further, you'll see the same thing for your smoke detectors. There's a smoke detector that has to be in each bedroom of the house as well as in the common area on each level of the house. Okay, now if there are any deferred water or sewer assessments or front foot benefits on the property, all of those things must be disclosed. So you have to ask your seller if there are any deferred water or sewer assessments or even front benefit charges. If there are not, you simply select that first box. If there are, then you simply select here and you put what those amounts are. Now, if by chance the front foot benefit is paid in the property tax bill, then that's great. You select the box there. But either way, you need to make sure that you ask that information and provide that disclosure to the buyer. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Yeah, real quick. Are those more like rural, rural areas that you would find that in?
No, not at all. So
Yeah.
your newer homes, so when homes, well, let's just say it like this, there are a couple of different pieces here. So you have your deferred water and sewer assessments, and then you have your front foot benefits. So deferred water or sewer assessments separated from the front foot benefit. When a builder builds communities, they have all kind of costs that they incur. So they put in the plumbing, you know, they put in lights, they put in roads and all those different things. So most builders will charge, they will have a charge to the seller, and the seller may have 15 years, they may have 27 years in order to pay off that cost. So they're paying a certain amount every year to pay the builder back for the expenses outside of their house and outside of their property line that they actually invested into the community on behalf of the buyers. I'm sorry, the homeowner who purchased. So you're going to ask them. Now, for your older homes, you're usually not going to see that. You won't see it. Your front for benefits for homes 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, maybe beautifully renovated. But if there were a front foot benefit, it likely would have already been paid. Okay, so you're going to ask the seller, and they would know because this is going to be something separate that they pay outside of their tax bill. So they're going to need to advise you as to, whether or not they do, what the cost is, and who they pay that to. Okay. Now that's something that the title company will need to be aware of also, because they have to include that. All right, private water or sewer supply. You need to make sure that you ask your seller whether or not it's well water, whether or not it's septic, or if it's on the public water and the public sewer. 13A, if it's public water, you simply choose yes, and you don't need to select anything else. Okay, if it is not, you choose no. 13B, if it's on the public sewer, you choose yes, and you do not need to select any of the boxes below. Okay, and many of the homes are going to have public water or public sewer. However, when you get to your rural areas, I would say most of those are going to have your private septic, private water, or well water. So you want to make sure that you get that information in advance. Okay, and if there are well and private septic system, then you want to get these other questions beneath answered. All right. Now, if there are any other private utility company assessments, if by chance the seller has any other utility that are outside of the norm that service that property, you need to know who they are. You need to select yes or no and put the information there that pertains to the company. All right. If there's an HOA or a co-op, you need to make sure, or condo even, you want to make sure that you get that information from the seller and you provide that information to the buyer. You're going to choose whether or not it's condo, co-op, HOA, so forth and so on. And you're going to put this information there because this is a disclosure that has to be made to the buyer. If there are any other assessments, sometimes you'll see the special tax. You want to make sure that you put that there. Ground rent, there are some properties, many in Baltimore, that do have a special tax. There are some in various areas also. You want to make sure if that's the case, you choose yes. If there is ground rent, if there's not ground rent, you choose no. Underground storage tank, if there is one, you choose yes. If not, then you choose no. All right, if the property is serviced by the Mount Vernon Historic View Shed, you choose yes. And that's something that you simply ask your seller if the property is. If not, you press no. All right. Smoke alarm notices. A lot of this is going to be very straightforward. The seller has to initial there either way because their smoke alarm can be no older than 10 years. They have to make sure it's at least 10 years or newer. Well, actually less than 10 years, and it needs to be both battery operated as well as electrically operated. Can anybody tell me why it's important that that smoke alarm be on both battery as well as electrically operated?
I guess
Yeah,
so that it
in
can be
case-
backed up. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The power outage.
Exactly. In the event that there's a power outage, you want to make sure that that smoke alarm is going to go off and be able to protect the people in the home. Okay. Now, paragraph 22, you want to make sure that for paragraph, what is it? All right, paragraph number 22. Once you start getting offers, this will be a part of your disclosures, okay? So the buyers will sign off on this because this is one of the disclosures that you're going to include in Bright MLS. Once the buyers begin to sign off on it, make sure that the buyers initial every feature on this document, every place that it says buyer. And I say that often because I see buyers will skip paragraph number 22 and buyers will skip paragraph number 23. Those are disclosures made to the buyer in the event that the buyer chooses to do if they want to rent the property, they have to get a rental license. And that's something, even if it doesn't apply to them at the moment, we have to make the disclosure and they have to initial off on it. Okay. So make sure that when you're reviewing your contract to make sure it's fully ratified, you have all the initials from the buyer in there and all the initials from the seller as well. Okay. Transfer tax exemptions. Is the buyer a school teacher, or is the buyer a police officer, a deputy sheriff, or any of those things? If those things apply, then the buyer's agent is going to choose those things before they send this signed copy over to you. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about anything that we've gone through? We're going to stop in about 2 minutes here. Let me see how much more we have to do. Go ahead.
I did have a question about the, you said something about the carbon monoxide detectors and the smoke detectors.
Yes.
Did you say that they were required in each room?
The smoke detectors are required in every bedroom. The carbon monoxide detectors are required on each level. Okay, so the smoke detector is required in both each bedroom and on each level in the common area. Whereas the carbon monoxide detectors are only required on
Okay,
each
and
level.
it doesn't matter the age of the house. That's
Doesn't
for
matter
every
the
house?
age of the house. Nope. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Does that include the
And if they're not,
basement?
Yes, it does.
and if they're not, then they have to get those installed before they sell their home?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
That's newer, so that came into effect in 2018. It didn't used to be that way, but as you can imagine, as there are, you know, things that happen with regards to people's safety and all kind of things happen. So they make sure that they update these documents to make sure that, you know, by and large, buyers and sellers are safe in the homes that they're purchasing as well as selling. Now, that being said, there
So I
are
have one
carbon
additional-
monoxide. Go ahead, 1 second. I want to make sure that I finish with
Okay.
your first question. There's, to make it easy, there are the combos. So the carbon monoxide detectors that are also smoke detectors. So you can advise your seller to use that one for each of the common areas or each level in a common area. So if there's a upstairs main level basement, one carbon monoxide detector that's also a smoke detector on each one of those levels. Okay, and then they'll just need to put the smoke detectors themselves in the bedrooms. All right. You had a question, Aurelia?
Yeah, I just, since this was effective in 2018, they're saying it doesn't make a difference of what age your house is. From that point on, you have, if you sell your house, then you have to comply to this. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Excuse
So
me, Jazz.
sure.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, what about the radon mitigation system? Is that something that you do here in Maryland?
So the house is not required to have a radon mitigation system here in Maryland.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
not one of the requirements. Now, when the
Okay.
buyer is purchasing, the buyer can choose to have a radon inspection. And we do recommend that our buyers have a radon inspection, but it's
Okay.
not a required, it's not something that the property has to come with, a mitigation
Okay.
system.
Okay.
Okay.
Jackie,
Yes,
are there requirements for the smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors? Are there any requirements for those?
what do you mean?
Well, we talked about whether it's hardwired or battery operated. Are there any, do they require?
Yes. Got it. So your smoke detectors, they need to be both battery operated as well as electrically operated. So they should be, you know, plugged into the electricity and have a battery, not either or. They have to be both. Okay, let me see how many more documents we have. I don't want to keep you guys too long tonight. I might be able to get through these in about 2 minutes. Are you guys okay? Do you want to hang in there
Yes.
for another 3 minutes or so?
Yes.
If not, I want to
Yes.
honor your time because we're at time now. Okay.
We're
So
good.
this next document, the lockbox addendum, it is required. So we make sure that we make this disclosure to the sellers. The most important piece about this is you want to advise them that there are going to be people touring the property with their agent. So if there's something that they don't want people to see, put it away. Okay. Also, if there's anybody else that lives in the property that's over the age of 18, or if they have a tenant there, they need to advise them also. If there is a tenant, the tenant actually has to sign off on this lockbox addendum so that we can actually install the lockbox on the property. Very important addendum. You've got to sign off on this one as well. So this is one of the documents that both the seller and the agent have to sign. All right, next, special taxing district for Prince George's County. If there is a special taxing district, if there's a special tax, which you're going to get from the tax record, your public records, you will look down at the tax assessments and you will see something that says special tax if the property has one. If it does, it must be disclosed on this document in Prince George's County. Other counties do not make you disclose the special tax. Prince George's County does. All right, financial condition of the property. This is information that you're going to ascertain from your sellers. However, it will not be shared as one of the disclosures. All financial information that pertains to your contract with the seller's financial obligations to their bank, those are confidential and nobody's privy to that. All right, so that's between the seller and the brokerage, but you get that information and put it on that document. If the property is built before 1978, you must have both of these lead disclosures with each one of your listings. Okay, so the seller has to acknowledge either there's known lead-based paint in the property or the seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint in the property. Either the seller needs to provide the records or the seller has no knowledge of the records, but the seller has to make an election on both A as well as B. The buyer has to make acknowledgements there. Their agent, actually you as the listing agent, you have to make the acknowledgement there.
Miss Porter, you went out.
Is anyone else here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, we
but Miss
still
Porter
Yeah,
went
we're
out.
here.
Yeah,
We're here.
yeah, she went out.
Maybe she'll come back.
Yeah, hopefully she'll come back. Yeah, I think she's having some kind of technical problem, of course.
Jasmine, you're muted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes,
Apologies.
we can hear
yes.
you.
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'm gonna jump right back in so that we can finish up with those documents. All right, so this document is one that both you as the listing agent and the seller have to sign off on. Okay, in the event that the property was built before 1978, this lead, poison, and prevention program disclosure has to be signed as well. And it's very simple. Either the property is or it is not registered. If it is registered, the sellers are going to know because they will have to pay for that registration, so they would know. So is or is not. Then also in paragraph 3, you're going to have 2 places where the seller needs to initial as well. Either an issue pertaining to lead-based paint has or has not occurred, but they need to initial one of those. Then they need to initial below in the event that such an occurrence has happened or does happen, the seller either will or will not be financially responsible or required to perform the treatment. So they need to initial where appropriate in each of those places. Okay, the buyer has to acknowledge it, and then both you and the seller have to sign off on that document. Okay, next one, simple and straightforward. It's our marketing service agreement with HWA. It lets all of our clients, both buyers and sellers, know that we have a partnership with HWA. We do not receive compensation for each warranty that is sold or anything like that, but we do co-market with them, and they do provide marketing expenses for us and education to our agents and support us at, if we do home buyer seminars or whatever the case is. So we have to make this disclosure to our clients. And last, that's simply thank you for your business. You're simply going to put your information there as the realtor. And that wraps up your listing documents, and you guys are all set. All right. Any questions about anything? All right, if you don't have any questions, I'm going to let you go for the evening. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. You guys are amazing. One more
Thank
time,
you.
any
You
questions?
are as well.
I would just say
Thank you
to
so much.
make sure you
You're
guys
Yeah,
welcome.
thank
include
you.
the velocity title towards the end of to see if the buyer will select velocity title.
That's a
Isn't-
very good recommendation, and I will include that for everybody. Just so that everybody knows what Curtis is talking about there, we have an addendum that's in your dot loop, that's also in your brokerment, that says buyer agrees to use velocity title. Include that with your listing document so that your buyer and your seller sign off on it. There are tremendous benefits to making sure that we can kind of manage the transaction, you know, for the buyer with the title company there. So whenever you can get the buyer to agree to use your title company, that is going to be a really good deal for you and the seller. So include that document in your listing documents for your seller to sign off on, and make sure you include that on Bright MLS. All right, guys, I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for your time this evening. If you think of anything after the training sometime tomorrow, give me a call and we can talk it through. Otherwise, guys, have a great rest of the evening.
Have a great
you.
evening,
Have a good
Good night,
everybody.
everybody. Have a
All
great
right.